Morning, everyone. Good morning, Hind, in the chat window, and everyone else. We are approaching our next exam, which is Tuesday next week, and we will have review on Thursday this week. Also, I will be posting the journal assignment, and we have one discussion prompt that we may do it in class, but we have other things that might take precedence. So you can do it later. Okay, so good. We're discussing simple detector semantics. That's a term that possibly Robert M. Harnish is using. That goes by many different names, as I mentioned last time. And we're looking at this paper, What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain, where they make claims that were ridiculed at the time by other neuroscientists. Uh, and so it was an uphill battle for them to make this point. Uh, at about the same time, Hubel and Wiesel, or Weissel, Hubel and Weissel, I think, uh, were doing experiments with cats and recording neural activity in the visual cortex of the cat's brain. And they were finding that when they presented the cats with different stimuli, different neurons would be active. And so this wasn't that surprising that there's a part of the brain that is responsible for vision. Um, but as we'll see, what Letvin and the others were arguing is that processing doesn't start in the visual cortex. It starts in the retina. So you have a few layers in the retina, and that's actually already not just recognizing that there's a point of light in a certain region, just a photoreceptor responding to the existence of some light or color or darkness. Um, it's in the retina itself, you have the processing of certain features. You have what they call feature detectors. And that's related to what we've been doing in decades since, and especially in the last decade plus in artificial intelligence, as we will learn in the next section. So this work that they did was inspired by uh, the feature detection model that we're going to learn about in the next section of Oliver Selfridge. And I have some video that I'll share with you. Actually, it was, let me see if I can find it before I introduce it. Okay. So this is kind of cool. Uh, so Hubel and Wiesel uh, were presenting objects to the visual system of a cat. So the cat would have its head fixed, and then they'd have electrodes reading activity in the visual cortex, and they'd show it images. Uh, and none of the neurons that they were testing showed any response to the images on the screen. And this was back in the day when they used slides. So they take a physical slide. It was a little um, picture of transparent plastic with an image on it. And then when you shine the light through it and you have a lens, it projects that on the wall. Okay. I don't know if you know what slides are or not. Uh, photographic slides from the old days. If you've seen Mad Men or anything set in those days, then you know what I'm talking about. Maybe everyone knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, so uh, they finally got activity because when they put the slide in, they took out one and put in another. There was a neuron that would go uh, get very activated, and they realized this will be in the video, but I just found this video, by the way. They realized it was the act of putting the slide in that introduced that line, that edge, the edge to the slide. So let's watch that. Is this the one I want, or is it this one? No, it's this one. Okay. Computer sound, and here we go.
The researchers actually listened in to individual nerve cells firing in the anesthetized cat as they presented it with different visual images.
When we started working, Torsten and I, in the late 50s, we set up our first experiments, and they didn't go well because at the beginning we couldn't make the cells fire at all. We'd shine lights all over the screen, and nothing seemed to work. And rather by accident, one day, we were shining small spots, either white spots or black spots, onto the screen. And we found that the black dot seemed to be working in a way that at first we couldn't understand until we found that it was the process of slipping the piece of glass into the projector, which swept a line, a very faint, precise, narrow line across the retina. And every time we did that, we'd get a response.
Okay, so
Either black dot, slipping the piece of
okay, so right here you see the edge of a, I guess it was a piece of glass, not an actual slide, that they were slipping into the projector. So they did not intend this to be the stimulus, and they were just fortunate to have that response. Uh, so it's interesting how science can work out sometimes. So they accidentally discovered what are called edge detectors. Okay, so that was Hubel and Weissel, um, and they were reading neurons in the visual cortex. This was not too surprising. There were already theories about how vision must work, and we knew that there were in the retina there are photoreceptors, and each photoreceptor responds to uh, light out in the world, but just when light hits it, it gets activated. You actually, it's more complicated than that, but at least it's that. And then those signals get sent back to the brain. And then at some point, since we can recognize shapes and objects and so on, there must be higher order neurons that are responding to the way the neurons earlier in the process are acting. So what would an edge detector be responding to? It would be responding to the fact that certain neurons at a previous stage um, are all stimulated in sync, right? And we're going to learn more about that in the next section. What Letvin et al. Did is they just tapped into the axon the axons coming from the retina. And so they were not listening to the visual cortex, they were listening to activity in the retina. And so here they say, oh, I wanted to also share with you their actual paper, which you can find um, in the optional material for the week. So where is it? Yeah. Okay, so this is covered in the slides. I'm looking for certain parts that I want to share with you. This, by the way, this image here on the left, uh, I think all these images, well, at least this one on the left is drawn by Ramoni Cajal, who I mentioned when we talked about neurons. And this image behind me is one of the first drawings of a neuron by Ramoni Cajal. Um, uh, and it's actually the neuron of a pigeon. I found out later. I didn't. Um, okay. So here's the initial argument. The assumption has always been that the eye. Sorry about this. Um, mainly sees light, whose local distribution is transmitted to the brain in a kind of copy by a mosaic of impulses. Suppose we held otherwise, that the nervous apparatus in the eye is itself devoted to detecting certain patterns of light and their changes corresponding to particular relations in the visual world. If this should be the case, the laws found by using small spots of light in the retina may be true, and yet, in a sense, they might be misleading. So they're talking about studies where people would shine a light in a point of light, and a certain neuron would in the visual in the visual cortex would respond, and they think of that as a law, right? There's a correlation here, uh, and that might lead you to believe that you just get the information just gets sent back. It doesn't get processed until it reaches the visual cortex. Uh, Consider, for example, a bright spot appearing in a receptive field. Its actual and sensible properties include not only intensity, but the shape of the edge, uh, its size, curvature, contrast, etc. So they're thinking maybe we should see if the retina is sensitive to more than just the presence of light in certain locations. Maybe it's sensitive to edges, size, curvature, contrast, etc. We decided then how we ought to work. First, we should find a way of recording from single myelinated and unmyelinated fibers. Fibers means axons in this case, or sometimes bundles of axons in the intact optic nerve. Second, we should present the frog with a wide range of visible stimuli as we could, as wide a range, not only spots of light, but things he would be disposed to eat, other things from which he would flee, sundry geometrical figures, stationary and moving about, etc. From the variety of stimuli, we should then try to discover what common features were abstracted. Again, this is in the retina, by whatever groups of fibers we could find in the optic nerve. Third, we should seek the anatomical basis for the grouping. And I think I have one more thing I want to share with you from this. So they do find or claim to have found sustained contrast detectors. That is, fibers that are extremely active when there is contrast present. Convexity detectors. To be convex is to not be concave. So concave is like a cave, and convex is like a blob. Is this it? So here they're just describing objects moving across or moving in a jerky pattern. Here it is. A delightful exhibit uses a large color photograph of the natural habitat of a frog from a frog's eye view, flowers and grass. We can move this photograph through the receptive field of such a fiber. So the receptive field is a certain area of the entire visual field, and every neuron has its receptive field. And when you feel something, when someone touches you, that there are neurons with receptive fields. And so when it comes to touch, the neuron's receptive field is some region of your skin. And if you touch outside of the receptive field, the neuron doesn't know anything about it, but other neurons do. And then with vision, the receptive field is your visual field, and each region has neurons that are listening to or sensitive to those regions. Okay, so we can move this photograph through the receptive field of such a fiber, waving it around at a 7-inch distance. There is no response. If we perch with a magnet a fly-sized object 1 degree large on the part of the picture seen by the receptive field and move only the object, we get an excellent response. So a fiber gets very active. If the object is fixed to the picture in about the same place, and the whole moved about, there is none. So you have an image with like grass and flowers and all that, and you have a little bug-like thing on it. And if you move the image with the bug fixed to the image, no response. Okay, take the bug away, move this thing, no response. But if you move the bug, again, it was just a magnet. It wasn't an actual bug. The little magnet relative to the background, it goes crazy. The neuron, which Harnish calls fiber 2. They call it operation 2. So these are different alleged detectors, A, B, C, and these are spike trains over time. So the activity of the neuron over time. So you can see where it's extremely active, and then when it calms down. Okay, and this is actually a short paper. So I have one more thing to read. There it is. Okay, so here's where they momentarily got themselves into some trouble. At the bottom, the operations thus have much more a flavor of perception than of sensation, if that distinction has any meaning now. That is to say, that the language in which they are best described is the language of complex abstractions from the visual image. So you have a visual image and you have complex abstractions in the retina. We have been tempted, for example, to call the convexity detectors bug perceivers. Such a fiber, operation 2, responds best when a dark object smaller than a receptive field enters that field, stops, and moves about intermittently thereafter. The response is not affected if the lighting changes or if the background, say a picture of grass and flowers, is moving. And it is not there if only the background, moving or still, is in the field. Could one better describe a system for detecting an accessible bug? That's how they end with that question. Uh, and then the asterisk mentions we're particularly grateful to Oliver Selfridge, whose experiments with mechanical recognizers decades ago of pattern helped drive us to this work, and whose criticism in part shaped its course. So we're going to learn about Selfridge, sometimes called the father of um, uh, pattern recognition, uh, and it was his work getting machines uh, to recognize images that inspired them to look into the biology and the neurology of the frog. So I'm going to pause and see if there are questions. And in addition to edge detectors, you have moving edge detectors, and that's very significant. So I'm going to share another video, or at least part of it, uh, that makes that point. So you'll have access to the whole thing, but I think we'll just watch part. No, that's the one we just saw. Okay, so this goes back to Hubel and Weissel. And so these readings come not from a frog's retina, but from a cat's visual cortex.
In this experimental footage, a bright vertical line stimulates a small number of neurons in the visual cortex of a cat. The crackling sound is the electrical activity of these neurons as they respond to this retinal image. By listening to the intensity of this electrical activity, the researchers can determine the correct orientation of the line. But when the line is moved to a diagonal or horizontal position, the amount of stimulation decreases dramatically.
We're only at a very elementary stage.
So that's important. This is a moving edge detector. It detects edges when they're moving, but only at a certain angle, or best, there's some ideal angle. And then at some other angles, it's virtually silent or totally silent.
But when the line is moved to a diagonal or horizontal position, the amount of stimulation decreases dramatically.
Nothing.
we're only at a very elementary stage when it comes to understanding something like how you recognize a face or something like that. The general region of the brain is known where things like that go on, but we don't have the slightest idea of what's happening at the level of single cells for that particular problem. But for more elementary problems, for the very first processes of vision, we do have a very good understanding of what happens at the very beginning. So it's just a start.
Misha Pavel of Stanford University is studying the successive stages of information processing that take place continually as we perceive the world. Using computer graphics, he has demonstrated how the visual system breaks down visual stimulation into millions of bits of information and recombines them into a coherent image that we recognize.
Seeing something seems such an effortless activity that it's hard to imagine for us the complexities and difficulties that are involved. Only when you try to build a robot that can actually see and recognize objects do you realize how complicated task this is. People must do an awful lot of processing in order to see images and interpret them.
Here is an image of a cat as our eye and brain sees it. Now let's look at what the visual system goes through to enable us to see this image. When the light first reaches the retina, the image is slightly defocused by the optics of the eye. Then it is broken up into millions of little pieces. Each receptor sees just a minuscule portion of the original image and measures its brightness. Different receptors in the retina are sensitive to different colors of light and respond to the amount of that color that they see. To discover objects, the visual system tries to find important boundaries. It uses edge and line detecting neurons, whose characteristics have been investigated by Hubel and Wiesel. Here, you can see the results of the red, green, and blue edge detectors. Look at the blue edges. It is hard to believe that there is a cat in there. What I'd like to show you now is the kind of information that the brain uses in order to make sense out of these messy images. The things that the brain seems to look for are constancies and simplicity. Imagine that you are in your visual system looking at this pattern of active neurons. But you can't recognize the pattern. We can see it now because all the points in the cat picture move together. This is an example of the brain using rigidity to recognize moving objects.
So what he refers to when we talk about moving edge detectors, he's also using the term rigidity, right? So we're pretty good at recognizing points in the visual field, features of the visual field that stay fixed relative to each other. And you can watch the rest when I link the video into the into this week. Any questions? Okay. So we were discussing, I forget exactly how far we got, but this is their experiment using the retina of the frog. And usually I draw it, so let me do that quickly. Okay, so you have like a hemisphere, and the frog is basically looking into this hemisphere. I looked for images of this experimental setup and never found them. So this is going to be the frog. And he's fixed on some kind of platform or something. Okay. And then you have inside this hemisphere, you have certain objects, magnets actually. And then I'm going to draw a big cartoon magnet out here. which they use to move these objects. Okay, nowadays you just have a video screen, and then they've tapped into fibers that come uh, out of the retina on their way to the visual cortex, and they have a machine that reads. So you have a few different fibers, a few different inputs, 5, 10, I don't remember. And then you have maybe a spike train. Okay. These should all be about the same height, of course. So let me draw that again. Maybe it's really excited here. And then you stop with the stimulation, right? Okay, so that's my drawing. And that's how they're doing this kind of experiment. Okay, let's clear that. And so they've labeled all these fibers, and they find that some of them respond to contrast, some to convexity, some to moving edges. Those turn out to be quite important, some to dimming. And as I said last time, that dimming might be something that occurs in nature when a bird of prey is swooping in from above. So there's a shadow, and this is something that the frog needs to respond to. There was even an alleged bug detector. And so they call this fiber 2, or at least Harnish calls this fiber 2. Most active when a dark object smaller than a receptive field enters that field, stops, and moves about intermittently thereafter. And it is not, as we just saw, diminished by changes in the background, or also dimming or changing in the light. And so, as we just saw, they asked, could one better describe a system for detecting an accessible bug, right? So remember the proposition. Every neuron can be assigned a proposition of the form, the conditions for my activation are now met. So when you have an edge detector, it gets most excited when the conditions for its activation are met. In this case, it's some line at a certain angle moving edge. And for the so-called bug detector, it'd be something acting like a bug, entering the visual field, moving around intermittently, and being convex, okay, being like a little blob. Okay, so the conditions for its activation might be something like a bug is moving in location L. So they're saying that that activity in the optic nerve, where axons are coming out from neurons in the retina itself, that has propositional content. The eye isn't just a sensory organ. The retina is perceiving bugs, categorizing them as such. And this is what got them some criticism. So they said the eye speaks to the brain in a language already highly organized and interpreted, instead of transmitting some more or less accurate copy of the distribution of light on the receptors, which is what everyone had assumed up until this point, and still assumed. So he says later in an interview, and I wish he would have gone into more depth. He says, we had the utmost trouble. We were laughed off the stage, literally. I don't know what that means, literally getting laughed off the stage. Abuse of the term, literally, of course. At the American Physiology Society in Atlantic City when we tried to present it. And there are anecdotes, there's some history that there were other neuroscientists that had a private meeting. I guess they thought that this was so absurd that it would be embarrassing if it got presented. So they had a private meeting without inviting Letvin and the others. And finally, Letvin and the others, including McCulloch and Pitts, were able to demonstrate their findings to these neuroscientists who were, conspiring to debunk them or discredit them, right? And they apologized when they saw the results. Okay, so it's an interesting story, and we do now know that there are many layers in the retina, and you do get edge detection in the visual cortex, but you also have detection of certain features, important features in the retina itself. And in retrospect, at least, it shouldn't be that surprising because, as you already saw, neural signals are, from an engineering standpoint, extremely slow. They're much slower than electricity down a copper wire. And with fiber optics, you have signals that travel at speeds approaching the speed of light. Um, and and so for an organism to survive, catch food, avoid predators, etc., in real time, grab a tree branch if it's about to fall from a tree. For an organism to survive in real time, they need to respond as quickly as possible. Of course, they're competing with each other in some cases, so they're all going to want to, they all have incentives to. That's not the right way to put it, but there's value, there's an advantage in being able to respond in real time. So why wouldn't the processing of visual information occur as soon as possible, right? Or close to it. It seems like uh, species would evolve to have such systems, but the paradigm of the time was nope, nope, that doesn't happen until you get to the brain. Alejandro says the person in the picture is Letvin. Where? This is Letvin right here, older than he was in the earlier image that I had of him in the lab. Uh, yeah. And I don't know for sure, but when he's making this face, I like to imagine that he's personifying a neuron that gets really excited when it sees an edge, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly what he's doing. Uh, for organism, does that include bacteria, how they sense light? Bacteria don't have neurons. And so not when I said what I said, I wasn't including bacteria. But but generally organisms or species that can be sensitive to light will have an advantage if they can respond quickly, right? And so you have you do have organisms that uh, have ways of maintaining the staying in the right region of the ocean, because if they go too deep, it gets too dark, and if they're too high up, it's too bright. I guess I don't know the details on that, but yeah, the eye has evolved separately on multiple occasions, which is strong. It's good evidence that um, that as species evolve, as evolution unfolds, um, you can expect the evolution of some light sensitive feature. So, okay. Other questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, then let's look at the challenges for simple detector semantics. So remember the um, the idea is that when you look at a neuron and ask, how can it be about anything? Because nothing else in the world seems to be about anything unless we decide it is, like words on a screen or the thermometer telling you, right? You design it so that it correlates in the right way. It's causally, it's sensitive to something in the world. The speedometer is sensitive to something else, right? The weather vane. So we can design things to act as if they represent things, but we gave it that job. We projected that role onto it. We can even find things in nature that can count as evidence of something. So I use the example of tree rings, telling you how old the tree is, but it's not like the tree's trying to communicate that to you. It's not like its job is to represent its age. It's just a feature of the way the tree grows over time and how thick the bark is depending on the season, right? So it seems like only neurons and collections of them are naturally about other things. And so how do you determine what it's about? And McCulloch and Pitts say, well, they're whatever activates them, that's what they're about. So if moving edge, it gets a neuron really excited, then it's a moving edge detector. And this is a perfectly natural response. You still hear people at conferences making this assumption, and yet it has some challenges. So we're going to look at these three challenges, and they all get two names for some reason. Not just for some reason, but because in the literature, people call them different things. And there's actually, in philosophy of mind and in cognitive science, there has been a lot of literature into mental representation. So right now, we're looking at problems that you can learn about if you ever get into mental representation, the question of mental representation. So that field is looking at how we represent the world and how brains are can be the physical things that do that. So the first problem is the right cause or depth problem. Then there's the spread or qua problem. And qua, some people pronounce it que, it is Latin, and we actually don't know for sure how the Romans pronounced their Latin. There are two theories. And it really just means as we will see. And then there's the misrepresentation or disjunction problem. So let's start with the right cause or depth problem. Here the question is, so when a neuron is excited by something, there's something out there in the world, and the light reflects off it, and it goes into the eye and hits the retina. So it casts an image on the retina. By the way, if you don't, the retina is at the back of the eye. So the light comes in and it's just a bunch of photoreceptors. Those are cells that are light sensitive, just in case, if someone doesn't know what the retina is. So you have all these photoreceptors, and let's say you pick out one and it gets really excited when, something happens. It could be an edge, a moving edge, a blob, whatever. And so there's an image cast onto the retina. And then there's stimulation or activation of those neurons. There's also some inhibition because you have contrast detection, but let's just put that aside for now. And then you have the stimulation of fiber 2 going along the optic nerve. And so we tend to want to say it's the object out there that the light's reflecting off of that this neuron is detecting. But why can't we say it's detecting the image that is cast on the retina? Not the object, the image. Or why can't we say that if it's a neuron that's a little further back in the process, why can't we say that it's detecting the activity of the neuron that's stimulating it? Because remember, the neurons represent whatever is stimulating them, the conditions for their adequate stimulus, right? But if you think about it, the neuron is going to be a more reliable detector of the image on the retina than it is of the object out there. Because maybe you don't really have the object out there, you just cast some other way, you just cast the image onto the retina with technology, for example. In fact, so I have some anecdotes. There's a researcher at, I don't remember if it's San Diego State or UC San Diego, who has researched octopus vision. And I looked for a video of this and couldn't find it. But at a conference presentation, he shared video of this octopus. And so you have an aquarium, small aquarium that the octopus is in, and they eat crabs and other things. So they and it's glass, right? So they put a screen on one end, and it's in a dark hidey hole, so you can't see it. It's hiding away in some dark region of the otherwise open aquarium, transparent. And they have a video of a crab walking across what looks like a seafloor. Okay, and when they play that video, the octopus comes flying out of its dark hole, and it's kind of scary the way it just flies out of the hole, crosses that distance, and kind of splats on the wall of the aquarium, right? And it's responding not to a crab, it's responding to the image of a crab, right? And that's going to become relevant later as well. So you have in a real case, you'd have a crab, and then you have light reflecting off it, and then you have the image of the crab on the retina, and then you have stimulation of photoreceptors. So why not say that fiber two is detecting the image? I say here the light, but let's call it the image or the stimulation of photoreceptors. Uh, Again, that's more proximal, and that would be more reliable because you can have uh, a crab image without a crab, or you can have a crab image with a crab. Okay, and so we have um, this is called the right cause problem because the question is why is it the bug or the crab or whatever that is the right cause? Why isn't it the light or the image or the stimulation of photoreceptors that is the right cause? And the norm is to just say, well, come on, obviously it's the bug or the crab or whatever's out there in the world, right? But since when you look at simple detector semantics, it just says it's whatever excites the neuron. That's what the representational content is. Well, all these things excite the neuron. They're all in that chain. So this is why it's called the depth problem, because the question now is, how deep do we go in that chain? Why do we stop at the object? Why don't we stop earlier? Someone needs to mute.
You're the back.
I'm going to
What
mute.
happened?
Okay. Okay, so green checks, if that makes sense, please. And Harnish even mentions like that you could go deeper than the bug. You could talk about the source of light that the bug is, like the sun or something. Like, why can't you say it's detecting those conditions, which might include the bug? Those of you that haven't responded with green checks, do you have any questions? Because that's, I think, more than half. Yeah. Do I have room to draw something? Okay, thanks for the feedback. I'm going to clear that, but it's pretty quiet out there. So let me try to um, make this point. So I'm going to make the point using an eyeball with it's kind of with its iris and lens, right? And so you have uh, let me try this again with a different color because I'm going to use colors. And we'll make the retina green, I guess. Hard to see, I guess, but and then we'll make the image yellow with the light. So you have an image. And as you may know, there's a mirror reversal, right? And then out there in the world is, let's say, a bug. Okay. And the question then is why should we say it's the bug that is the right cause when it could be the light or the image as it appears on the retina or even the stimulation of the retina itself? There's a question of what the right cause is. And everyone wants to say it's the bug. But strictly, if you just look at the definition of simple detector semantics, the light beam also activates fiber 2, and so does the image on the retina, and so does the stimulation of those photoreceptors. And so the definition itself, the theory itself, doesn't solve this problem, and it seems ad hoc to just assume it's the bug. Again, that's why it's called the right cause problem, and it's called the depth problem because along this causal chain, there's a question of depth. How deep should you go? Okay. Oh, what does ad hoc mean? Yeah, Zaw says it's also interesting that the retina takes images upside down. So the light enters through what is effectively like a pinhole, and then you have a lens, and that mirror reverses the images. Yeah, and you can do that if was it this class where I was discussing the camera obscura? Um, if you have a pitch black room in a tiny little hole and no other light, whatever's if it's outside a sunny day, that will be projected onto the other wall, um, mirror reversed upside down. Yeah, just like a camera works. Okay, so would this view change the answer of the first week of classes, number of apples? Um, and could we say then there are 4 apples instead of 3? Yeah, if you want to say there's the apple out there in the world, there's the image on the retina, and there's the stimulation, but we typically don't do that. Um, if you're thinking the additional apple would be the stimulation of the photoreceptors, most people wouldn't represent that as an apple or with an apple. They just say it's photoreceptors being stimulated by an image of an apple, and you might often do represent the image of the apple with a little picture of an apple. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Uh, and Zoll says ad hoc means only that part, only for this, for this only. So when a neighborhood has an ad hoc committee to deal with, I don't know, vandalism, that's people get together just to talk about vandalism. So it's ad hoc. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with something being ad hoc, but in scientific theory, it's criticized because let's say you have your theory and then there's a challenge for it, and then you alter your theory only so that the challenge no longer appears, right? That's considered ad hoc. There's nothing wrong with altering your theory, but you should have independent reasons driven by experiment, or reason more generally, that justify that. So if I have a theory where I predict X, Y, and Z, and those things don't happen, and then I alter my theory and I say, well, I still hold the theory, but with that exception, I no longer predict those things. Um, then that's considered just you're just trying to protect your view from criticism. So if you say simple detector semantics is well, uh, the neuron represents whatever excites it, so long as that's something out there in the world and not a beam of light, not an image, and not other neurons, but an object out there in the world. Well, that's just an ad hoc change to the theory. Yeah, and then um, the literature just explodes because some people say, well, come on, it's the it's the bug because bugs are important to frogs. They want to eat them. And so it has something to do with the value of bug detection, not image detection, not other photoreceptors detection, but bug detection. And that's going to become relevant uh, soon. Okay, so that's the first problem. And I can erase the image. This is called the spread or flaw problem, and some people do pronounce it quay. And uh, as I say here, it's used to identify the relevant category or property of an object. I don't know how many other people use it, but in a philosophy conference, you might hear someone say, um, use qua in the following way. So uh, if you're thinking about an individual, that person might be a mathematician and that person might also be a bicyclist. So they do a bunch of different things. And one thing that is that they're a mathematician, another one is that they're a bicyclist. And someone could say, well, what do you think of Smith? And you say, only a philosopher would say this. Qua bicyclist or mathematician, right? And that's just saying as a bicyclist or as a mathematician, because you might admire the person for their mathematics, but not for their, cycling, whatever. And so that's all we're doing. We're just using that term to categorize things. So a bug is a lot of things. Every object sits exists in some indeterminate number of categories, right? So you picture the MasterCard symbol, right? The Venn diagram. And so for every object, it can be categorized according to all kinds of different categories. And there are a bunch of categories it's not in, but there are a bunch that are. And you can make up some weird categories, right? And so a bug is a winged thing. It's a potential pest at picnics. It's a potential victim of insect spray, etc. It's a bunch of things. It's a package of protein, right? It's something in the air if it's a flying insect, right? So why should we say that the activity in fiber 2 detects that its target is a bug, or that it identifies it qua bug or qua bug, but not qua potential pest at picnics? Why are we determining that it's a bug detector? And again, you might try to bring in evolution, which is uh, really the go-to response. But again, I'm telling you that it's a giant literature. So there are all kinds of challenges that exist for that attempt as well. So this is a problem if you're thinking that simple detector semantics isn't just detecting that there's a thing out there, but it's a thing that fits a certain category. And then finally, and I think the first two are pretty straightforward, but the third one I know it has a few more working parts. And this is called the misrepresentation problem, also known as the disjunction problem. It's called the misrepresentation problem because most of us agree that with representation comes the possibility of misrepresentation. So when I utter the words, the cat is on the mat, that could be true or false. That could be right or wrong. That could be accurate or inaccurate. What would make it accurate or true? Well, if there's a cat and it's on a mat, and if the cat gets off the mat and leaves, and I say the cat is on the mat, I'm saying something false. So I can be wrong or I can misrepresent the situation. A map can be a bad map. It can misrepresent the situation. It can show Golden Gate Park as being much larger than it actually is in relation to the surrounding streets and buildings and all that. Or it can just be a bad map. A diagram or a blueprint can misrepresent the layout of the house that ends up getting built. The speedometer can be broken, right? The smoke detector can be triggered by something that's not smoke. So the possibility of misrepresentation seems to come along with representation. And it's not that we want our things that represent to sometimes fail us. We'd like them to never fail us, right? But it's that it can happen. And this seems to be part of the natural world. Animals camouflage themselves. And so other animals misrepresent them, it would seem, right? The octopus, it seems, that I just told an anecdote about, is many of us think it is misrepresenting the situation, or its visual system is misrepresenting the situation. There's a crab out there. There isn't. There's just a video image of a crab. Now, go back to fiber 2 and remember the picture I drew of the frog, the hemisphere, and the magnets. Fiber 2 was not detecting bugs at all. It was detecting moving magnets that they decide are acting like bugs. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that fiber 2 is activated by bugs, by actual bugs. I think it's safe to assume that, but they didn't have actual bugs on the screen or in that hemisphere. They had magnets. Okay, so fiber 2 is activated by what? Well, it's activated by moving magnets, and under this assumption, it's also activated by moving bugs. So there are now two different types of things, and significantly different types of things, that activate fiber 2. Okay, so it seems like fiber 2 is not just a bug detector, and it's not just a moving magnet detector. It's detecting things that are either bugs or moving magnets. So MM just stands for moving magnets. It's an either bug or moving magnet detector. And this is why it's called the disjunction problem, because disjunctions are statements with or in them. But we don't want to say that. We have pre-theoretic reasons to want to say it's a bug detector, and when magnets trigger it or activate it, it's misrepresenting the situation. If the frog tries to bite or eat the moving magnet, we want to say it's misrepresenting the situation. But now we've lost the logical possibility of, of acknowledging misrepresentation, because built into the definition of simple detector semantics is neurons represent whatever activates them, whatever excites them. So they can never misrepresent. The octopus seems to have not a crab detector, but a crab or a video image of a crab detector. And if that's the case, then when the video image gets the octopus to fly out of its hidey hole and splat on the wall, the glass wall of its aquarium, it's not misrepresenting the video image as an actual crab. It's correctly representing something that's either a crab or a video image of a crab. Get it? I was a long time ago. Oh, wait, let's see. I'm reading a direct message. The next exam next week is on this material, yeah, which ends after the last exam. So it's the neurology, the biology, the brain, etc. And Madeline says, "Isn't it just activated by movement?" It depends. No, not the in the case of the octopus, no, it's not just activated by movement. It's activated by complex shapes, and that's actually the work he's doing. So he's looking at changes you can make to the video so that it's not so excited, right? Um, but some neurons are activated only by movement of certain shapes, like an edge. So you have moving edge detectors. Um, and what Letvin and the others say is it's not just movement, it's movement of a little blob that's intermittent. Okay. Which suggest intermittent means that it stops and starts kind of randomly over time. So, which suggests that smooth, continuous movement does not excite it as much, or maybe at all. Yeah. So that's good that you asked that question, because it's not just activated by movement. Okay, so I'm posting the slides soon after we get through this. We're almost at the end. So okay. Uh, so long ago I was at a I think it was Java Beach Cafe uh, in Ocean Beach in the sunset. Uh, and there's a kind of a dirt strip, so they have outdoor seating. And for some reason, I had whipped cream on a straw because I was having like a mocha, I guess. And there were a lot of birds around, and for some reason, I flicked the whipped cream at this kind of patch of dirt where like ice plant is growing and so on. So all these little white flecks go through the air, and there were crows, uh, seagulls, and pigeons. And every single crow, seagull, and pigeon stopped what they were doing, and they just swarmed. They just converge on these white flecks as they go flying through the air. And the moment those white flecks of whipped cream hit the ground, they lose interest and they go back to whatever they're doing. If they're in mid-flight, they just fly away. Okay. Um, how do we explain that? Why does that cause such a dramatic change in their behavior? They see white flecks going through the air. Maybe they thought they were bugs, but they're white, so maybe they thought something else. Quick movement is not sufficient. It's part of it, but they don't just chase any movement. You don't see them flying after cars, or or flags that are whipping in the wind. Tiny shapes, yeah. And why do they care about tiny shapes flying through the air? This isn't supposed to be a challenging question. Why do birds chase after? Maybe because they act like bugs, potential food, right? So seagulls and pigeons, et cetera, in an urban area, they are very quick to identify food discarded by humans. So if you take some crackers or breadcrumbs and toss them, they're going to go right after them, right? And and yet, uh, crackers and breadcrumbs, when they hit the ground, they act one way, and whipped cream, flecks of whipped cream act another way. They just splat on the ground. They don't tumble. Okay, so of course, being the kind of person that I am, I get a little more whipped cream. I do it again, and I notice, sure enough, the moment those white flecks go flying through the air, they all start to converge. And the moment that the white flecks of whipped cream hit the ground and they splat, the birds completely lose interest, all of them, right? Suggesting that, so we what we want to say is is their potential food detector, as Layla calls it, or potential food, right? Their food detector or their potential food detector is misrepresenting the situation. And there's another detector that notices whether things tumble or not, that isn't activated. Maybe there's a splat detector, right? And that one is activated, and that kind of changes their behavior, right? So what we want to say is that they are misrepresenting the flecks of whipped cream as bread or crackers, something like that. But according to simple detector semantics, we can't do that. The detector is not just a breadcrumb detector. It's a breadcrumb or white flecks of whipped cream detector. So any potential false positive becomes a true positive because you keep changing what it's representing, what its job is, what the representational content of the neuron is. You thought, according, just you were naive in thinking it's just a bug detector. Because now that we know that moving magnets also excite it, according to the theory, it's a moving magnet. I mean, I'm sorry, it's a bug or moving magnet detector. So we have a theory that seems to clash with our intuition. Now, we could just drop the intuition, but that's not how most people respond to this. I have one more example. What if you have a smoke? So uh, long ago, I used to have a smoke detector that would be triggered by shower steam. So whenever someone took a shower, this thing would go off. Uh, and we want to say it's misrepresenting steam as smoke. But according to simple detector semantics, can you imagine you call the place to complain? I bought your smoke detector and it's not just detecting smoke, it's being triggered by shower steam. Can you imagine them saying in response, well, according to simple detector semantics, it represents whatever activates it. And so it's working just fine. It's not misrepresenting, right? So again, it's the definition itself that leaves the possibility uh, of misrepresentation out. It makes it logically impossible. I don't really get the point, Alejandro, but uh, yeah, I don't get the point. But the again, it's just another example of the misrepresentation or disjunction problem. And so uh, anything that activates fiber two can now be added to an ever-growing disjunction because then it's detecting this or this or this or this, etc. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes people try to rely on the natural environment or evolution to uh, meet this challenge. And so remember, I have the definition here. I'm sorry, an updated version. So this is called Simple Detector Semantics NE for natural environment. So units or sets of units represent what turns them on, what activates them, what excites them in the natural environment of the system. So good. So you might argue that pigeons and crows and seagulls don't have whipped cream in their natural environment. And the octopus doesn't have video images and TVs and monitors in its natural environment. It has crabs, but not video images of crabs. So maybe we could do that. And and this has some problems. So first, even in natural environments, fiber 2 might be triggered by a non-bug. Okay, so a moving magnet is not part of the frog's natural environment, but you might have something caught in a cobweb like a stick on a windy day, so it's moving intermittently, and fiber that's a part of the natural environment. Still, you get that we would want to call that misrepresentation. But fiber 2 could be triggered by it, and according to simple detector semantics, even the updated version with natural environment built in, it would still count that as part of what it's meant to detect, part of what its representational content is. So it's not a bug or moving magnet detector, but it's seemingly a bug or stick caught in a cobweb detector. So it doesn't really solve the problem. And second is we need an account of natural environment. What is part of an organism's natural environment or a species' natural environment? Uh, and why can't they recognize those things? The seagull can't represent a French fry. They sure do like them, right? A seagull, a dog can't represent its food dish or the object that it's fetching, the tennis ball. These aren't part. I mean, you might argue that well, domesticated animals now have artifacts as part of their natural environment, maybe, but still there are plenty of wild animals that represent artifacts all the time. The birds that perch on telephone poles and wires and fences and right. So this looks hopeless. You'd have to have you'd have to make some pretty serious revisions to simple detector semantics, natural environment, uh, so that you can still have representation by organisms. Questions? Okay, that takes us to the end of these slides, and I will post these slides. Well, what time is it? Uh, really, no questions? I'm gonna go look at something and see if it's ready. One moment. Thank you, Arceli. Pretty straightforward for me because I'm learning the same thing in my physiological psychology class. I hope you're enjoying that class. Um, I took physiological psychology long ago and I loved it. Loved it. Um, I'm curious though, Araceli, are they discussing these challenges to the to detection or simple? I'm sure they're not calling it simple detection detector semantics, but I'd be interested to know if they're discussing these challenges.
Well, no, they're not discussing like challenges. They're just discussing about how like different neurons detect different things. Like some neurons are used to detect like edges. It's like what we've been talking about how like it's specialized in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Um, I think my physiological psychology class was the first time I learned about any of that. Uh, I still I still have the textbook. Okay. Physiological psychology. Anyways, I'm loading something right now. Probably my textbook needs to be updated. Okay, I'm waiting for something to load. You can't see it, but I can. Uh, Gustavo writes, off-topic question. November 11th is Veterans Day, no class. Is it on, wouldn't that be on Monday? Okay, we'll check that in just a moment. If there's if there's no class on Tuesday, then the exam will not be on that day. Okay. Uh, so this is what I'd like you to write on, and I haven't published it yet, but I will. I'm just resizing things and getting it ready. Okay, this is D4. And you can do this on your own time after class today. Interpreting split brain phenomena, hemispherectomies in the Wada test. We've seen various interpretations of split brain phenomena and related phenomena. Gazzaniga, at least back in the 80s, held that the left hemisphere is conscious while other brain regions are not. Ramachandran holds that a split brain patient has two independently conscious entities, one for each hemisphere. Richard Swinburne holds that the entity that is conscious must be an immaterial soul in causal connection with some region of the brain. And I find myself compelled to hold that certain brain regions, hemispheres included, are independently conscious even when intact. That is, even for brains that are intact, not just people that have had some kind of surgery. And there are people, so if you watch the optional video a week or two ago, you'll see Yair Pinto. Um, I don't know if I pronounced that right, my first name, argue that even in a split brain case, there's just one conscious individual. Okay. And there, you don't have to focus on, you don't have to limit yourself to these interpretations. I write, given what we've learned in class and your best understanding of the world, what do you think is the thing or the things that is or are conscious? What is it that has consciousness? What are you? What right now you're hearing my voice, you're seeing things on the screen, right? There's something it's like to be you. You're hearing other things maybe in the room and you're sitting in a chair and there's something that feels like. What is it that is conscious of all this? Do you agree with any of these theorists? Do you have an alternative view? Support your answer with reason. And by the way, I include myself in here, but uh, you're not going to get extra points for agreeing with me. So by all means, if you don't agree with me, be clear about that. And what you're graded on is not what you think so much as how you support it. Okay. So I would hate to think that those people uh, who think that that regions are independently conscious are just doing that because they want to please the instructor. And again, it won't work. We're looking at how you support your answer, not what your answer is. In the chat, yes, you're welcome to use outside resources, Araceli. You're not required to, and just if you do, then do cite them. For assignments like this, I'm not going to require like a certain type of citation like MLA or APA. But yeah, you're going to do this later today, ideally. It's not the end of the world if you can't do it today, but I'd like to get this done today. Do you have an alternative view? Support your answer with reason. And if you're baffled or confused by all this, then elaborate on what you find so confusing. This is a philosophy course. It's considered perfectly acceptable to admit that you're perplexed about something. You're not running for office, right? You're not leading troops into battle. You're trying to understand something that's very mysterious and puzzling. Okay. So with that, I'm going to dismiss class. I'll stick around if there are questions. And I do want to look up the date, November 11th, and see what's going on. So if you want to stick around, I'm about to do that. Can we use alternate non-physiological causes? You can use any sources you think are relevant if you'd like to. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. So one moment while I look up for anyone who's interested, um, the academic calendar.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, you're welcome.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
In your humble opinion, since you believe that there are multiple entities in like the human brain that could be conscious, whatever that means, do you believe the same thing of like different parts of our body, like our cells and stuff like that?
I don't tend to. So it really depends on exactly what you're asking. There's a view called panpsychism. You might have heard this, okay? And I'm very sympathetic with panpsychism, but it's the view is that um, so there's this mystery. How do atoms and neurons and how does the brain, how do these things get put together um, uh, so that they're conscious? And uh, panpsychism is, well, all the parts are already conscious to a point. They have a little bit of consciousness, just like a massive object is made of little things that all also have mass. And volume is, a thing with volume, a thing with energy is things that have energy. And so I'm very sympathetic with that. But that's not to say that there are memories and records and opinions and stimulate, right? It's a very raw level of consciousness. Um, so maybe that view's correct. And if that view's correct, then not only do skin cells have some degree of consciousness, but virtually everything does.
Yeah, because like I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I know there's like cells and things that defend themselves. I'm not sure if cells is the right word, but there's things in our body that actively defend themselves to not die. Um, and
Right. I wouldn't think that those biological responses require consciousness. So I myself wouldn't use that as a reason to think that they are conscious. So some people say, plants interact with the environment in ways that we've really haven't appreciated. They do some pretty interesting things. They seem to quote unquote communicate with each other. Uh, and it's quite interesting, but I wouldn't use that as a reason to think that they're conscious. I would, on the other hand, use panpsychism, which I think has a lot of potential, as a reason to think that they might have some form of low level consciousness.
okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
I really subscribe to panpsychism, and I feel like this relates to that, so I think it's really cool that we're learning about it.
Yeah. It's exciting to see panpsychism get serious attention these days. Most people would used to just dismiss it. Uh, Thanks, Araceli.
Yeah,
So I'm now discovering that um, earlier as suggested, that there's no class on the 11th. So I will not hold the exam on that day. Uh, I'll decide that tonight on what to do. Okay, but it won't be on the 11th.
thank
All
you.
right, everyone. That's all for today.